crossing, what we do is we go out and we search every legal job that we can find in the market. So the government websites, we look at every law firm in the country we can find, we look at every company we can find, every public interest organization, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of law firms, tens of thousands of government sites, hundreds of thousands of companies. And so we're looking at all that information and we're putting every job we can find on Law Crossing. And what's Law Crossing so much different than a site like Indeed or other LinkedIn or other job boards is that we don't charge employers to put jobs on our site. We charge them for if they want to have like a post at the very top, but other than that, we go out and we research every job we possibly can find. And other sites, charge for that. So that means that they're eliminating, a number of jobs that they would otherwise have on the site. So that's what I like about it. It's just very pure. It's all about research and providing people information, which I think is nice. I would say the ones where most money and kind of demand is complex litigation, corporate law, pair law, and intellectual property law. A few factors affect attorney salaries. One of the main factors that affects attorney salaries is when I talk about money that attorneys can make. The most important thing is you want to think of is having access to waterfalls of money. And what I mean by that is, a company has a serious issue, willing to spend money, and they're almost willing to do it without thinking. They'll just write checks every month for as long as it takes. Big companies will step in and do the work, and they'll send bills and they'll just get paid. And that's kind of how it works with the largest companies of the serious issue. So the first thing is to make more money if you're doing work for large companies and name brand companies, serious issues, than you will if you're doing work for individuals or small companies. Anytime an attorney does work for individuals, they're looking to have a very, very difficult time getting paid. And one of the biggest complaints of attorneys, small towns and small practices and that have small firms and so forth, is they tend to be working for individuals or small companies. The bill is scrutinized and try to pay them less, and they kind of beat them up and so forth. And so work for larger clients, you'd have those problems. And when you work on things that are very, very important to the company and its survival or profitability, tends to result in money, more money, and need to have very good attorneys that are highly paid working on the matters. So, example would be litigation, for example. Litigation, very emotional. Someone is sued for a lot of money. It could be tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. They defend themselves, and the person suing is going after a lot of money, so it's very, very emotional. And if large companies are involved, those two companies are fighting, huge war. Everybody's willing to write big checks and just to keep kind of the thing going. So that's kind of one of the things that affects it is, waterfalls of money and emotional issues. Law tends to involve companies, going out to the stock market where they might raise hundreds of millions of dollars. And so paying an attorney $5 or $10 million to them is just a very small cost, and they want to have things done. So those are just a couple major macro things to think about. But in terms of how much money an attorney can make, attorney's almost always gonna make more money working for a major law firm, big city. Major law firms represent major clients. They have attorneys typically working for them because they can pay the highest salaries, so they attract the best attorneys. They have the most interesting work, and they also have access to waterfalls of money, which means the large clients paying these fees and doing so, and provides attorneys security and also higher salaries. Salaries tend to be reflective of the fact that there'll be a lot of work. Attorney that's accepting a high salary from a big firm realize that they're kind of front loading a lot of compensation earlier in their career. If you work in a smaller law firm, you may start at a very low salary, but you may build a book of business and clients and so forth as you go along and make more later on. But if you're working in a large law firm, your making partner are very slim, so you're front loading a lot of compensation early in your career. But regional firms typically can't pay as much. The reason is they're working for smaller clients. Clients don't have as much money. Some rates seem to be lower. You also don't have tolerance for someone working for an extended period of time in their matters, and they don't have access to waterfalls of money. And it's got some big law firms, but law firms there, market like Omaha or Ohio or something, are going to be sending individuals as well as companies. So anytime you're closer to an individual, compensation is going to fall off the roof. So if you want to make the most money, it's always going to be the largest international law firms, and it depends on the type of work they do. You have work in sophisticated litigation. You also have things like insurance defense, where the money's not as much because insurance companies so much work that they can put a lot of downward pressure on the billing rates. Labor employment is another firm like that where there can be a lot of downward pressure. A lot of work and it's not as sophisticated. Like the insurance defense issues kind of play themselves out and repeat over and over again. Thing goes with labor and employment. Just because a large labor and employment firm or a large insurance defense firm does not mean that pay a lot. It has to be, sophisticated, large international law firm with big clients. So, when I look at firms, other markets, and they might be like one of the 100 largest firms, the top 200 largest law firms, I always look at to kind of figure out how much they pay. If they seem competitive, as I look at their clients. So, you could have a law firm in, get like Sacramento or, or Boise or something, you would think, well, these aren't major markets, maybe they don't pay a lot, or, even Aspen, Colorado, there's law firms, that are actually okay. They're not bad law firms. You look at their clients, and so when you see who their clients are, if they're major clients, then those clients can afford to write lots of checks. And if the clients can afford to write lots of checks, then they're typically probably be able to pay pretty decent firms and they're going to want good attorneys working there. So, it's the factors that affect salaries of a law firm are going to be obviously what type of the attorney is going to make or what type of attorney the person is. So, obviously junior attorneys are going to make less than senior attorneys. More demand for the attorney in their practice area. So, there's litigators as a general rule, and there are corporate attorneys, so it affect your salary. Corporate attorneys then are people that have PhDs in electrical engineering from top schools. They could do patent law, for example. Then there are corporate attorneys, it's different types of things. So it's all about the law of supply and demand too. Those are kind of the main issues I think that affect it. And then, the economy, whether or not one practice area is in favor or another. So complex litigation, just called kind of general commercial litigation is, when companies are sued, companies are suing different matters, and when the matters are big enough that both sides can afford to spend a lot of money on legal fees. That's kind of how I would define it. It involves disputes between companies, so if Apple sues Samsung, vice versa, something along those lines, be a big case, or if is sued by someone, a company, sorts of things. A lot of money involved. How I would kind of define litigation. You certainly can have litigation between small companies too, and individuals suing, companies. But the larger the companies involved, the more money there is, and the higher the salaries are going to be. Litigators tend to like to write. A lot of writing involved. There's a lot of writing involved. There's reputational, so you're kind of putting down the other side and talking negatively, or trying to get under people's skin and that sort of thing. So that's one of the things that litigators do. The other thing that's important to understand about litigation is they have all these soft skills, which involve like your ability to reason and argue, and ability to understand facts and understand people and things that you can't really test a lot of times. Because there's so many litigators out there, firms tend to be very cognizant of the qualifications of the attorney. So they want them, a lot of cases, to have gone to really good law schools or done really well in good law schools, be hors de coif, and at times they like it if they went to good colleges, and they want them to, a lot of times, have done federal clerkships, or better would be like an appellate clerkship, like the circuit court clerkship, and they want them at the highest level, and they want them to have, really good firms. And it's kind of more important in a lot of cases than it would be for law. It's just your ability to reason and write very convincingly and distinctly, and see facts and make a big difference. So that's kind of what a litigator is. What does a litigator do? So, litigator, you're thinking about going to law school or thinking about switching practice areas. Essentially what happens is people are thinking about in a lawsuit. So someone will generally write a letter saying, me money, you did these things wrong. And you can see that, kind of all the time. And then the other side will respond and say, no, we didn't do anything wrong. You're actually the one that's wrong. If you sue us, we're going to kill you. I mean, they won't say kill, but they'll say, we're going to come after you and there's going to be all these penalties. And then so one side will file a lawsuit. When the lawsuit's filed, whole game of like drafting the lawsuit and coming up with causes of action, which would be, breach of contract or whatever the different, there's tons of different causes of action. And then the other side will respond to that and sometimes they'll settle, but usually they'll go into a process called discovery, where they'll start trading documents and they'll fight about documents back and forth trying to get documents. And then they'll take depositions and both sides will say they need all this information and they'll fight about that. And that go on for months or years. And then at some point, sometimes someone will write a summary judgment motion, which is saying, basically, we deserve to win this case. There's no kind of how the whole thing plays itself out. Sometimes people, when they get the complaint, will do what's called a demur, which is they're saying there's no complaint stated. So there's kind of all this writing that goes back and forth. And I like to write, to enjoy this process called discovery, where you're fighting about getting documents. You have to enjoy the depositions, which are talking to people. People have kind of different roles in all this. There's the writing of the summary judgment motions, and then when you go to court, or get to trial, there's going to be writing about the motions, what are called motions in limine, where you're trying to exclude certain things from the trial and so forth. And so all this kind of stuff happens, and then eventually you go to trial. But most cases, probably 95% of them never make it to trial. Everybody settles, and there's lots of money spent before trial, before it ever goes there. So that's kind of the whole process of what a litigator does. To enjoy the process of writing and arguing, writing these motions and constantly having motions back and forth and prospect of going to trial and taking depositions and all that stuff, you have to kind of look forward to that. So a junior attorney might start out and, their goal is going to be maybe doing discovery, may ask you for 10,000 different, they ask you for documents, or they might ask you 50 different types of documents, and then you have to go through and see if you can find those documents and respond to it, and it can be very tedious and boring to enjoy doing that. And then you have to enjoy doing that for lots of different cases, and be able to respond. There's always going to be deadlines. I was practicing, there were deadlines every days. You need motion after motion after motion, and to respond, to do a motion and go to court, and so you enjoy that. And it's very high stress. I mean, the litigators that I know have died like very deaths from all that. I mean, they just have heart attacks, or they cancer. Or they hear about people that I practice law with, all the time, dying. I mean, every couple months it seems like. I mean, it's very stressful. It's not an easy job. It'd be very rewarding if you like it. I mean, some people just are animated by it. It's cool. I mean, it's a lot of fun. But kind of what a litigator does. And the higher up you get, start bringing in clients, you build a reputation for yourself. And to be dedicated, can't miss deadlines. It's very difficult to go on vacation, fighting with 15 different people at the same time. The thing they always say about litigation is that makes it very stressful is, us is the court, your boss is the clients, and then your boss is the attorneys that work above you, and then so everybody's kind of out to get you, and it can be very stressful. The law involves work for companies, and so companies will typically have various types of issues that are happening. Like times throughout the year, they have lots of documents that they may need to file government to be in compliance with various things, whether they're a public company or even a private company. Have contracts and so forth that they need to be done. They'll have various issues that are happening, and that's what's kind of called the corporate generalist, or just general corporate work is you'll run that sort of thing. But then companies will also buy companies or merge with companies, and so when that happens, all sorts of agreements need to be done. A process called due diligence that happens with that. Go through and make sure the other side's doing things a certain way. And there's companies will go public. They have to put together information to do that. Send buyers and sellers. They'll raise money. All sorts of different things that corporate attorneys do. There's people that deal specifically with financing, companies, financing. Companies will help them, bonds. There's law firms. There's all sorts of different work that corporate attorneys do. Smaller markets do all these different things, and in larger markets, they tend to be very, very concentrated on maybe one aspect of corporate law. So they may just do like one particular aspect of like an agreement even, and in how big the law firm is. Corporate market is, I mean, litigation, like I talked about earlier, is very profitable and can make a lot of money because it's so emotional and there's just so much going on and when things are going well. But it can also slow down. Litigation can slow down and it can kind of come to a standstill if a case goes away. And then you could be an attorney inside of a law firm and you just wouldn't have anything to do. Makes corporate a very good practice area if you want to make a lot of money, is that the companies have like all these different things that they're doing on an ongoing basis. Like they constantly need agreements done, and they're always talking to the corporate attorneys. So I know corporate attorneys who have like 20, 30 clients around LA, and these attorneys are just driving around meeting with their clients all week, and they make very good money and they have very good careers, and they're generalists, and if company wants to merge or something or do, they work on those, and so corporate attorney can do very well with that. And so that's one of the things that makes it exciting. And then because they have such a close relationship with the corporate attorneys, when they get sued all the time, they'll call the corporate attorney. And so the corporate attorney will end up doing a lot of the work. So that can help them a lot. And then attorneys are always kind of bringing in business and having a lot of work. And the work is kind of specialized. A litigator tends to be someone that likes to write and read. That tends to be their background. Corporate attorneys tend to be more guys that would like to take women too. I mean, there's probably more corporate attorneys than there are men than women, but kind of people that like to do math, and they're interested in math or science, or they'll like taking business classes and things like that. That tends to be always people that are good at math and people that are good at science and history and things like that. And really that preference develops when someone's like 7 or 8 years old. It develops very early on. Some people have a skill in one area or the other. Some people have both. But people have a skill in one area or the other. So if you're very skilled in like math and things like that, you're probably better off being a corporate attorney than you would be a litigator. If you're very skilled at writing and reading and things, and that's what interests you, then you should probably be a litigator. But kind of what corporate lawyers do. The practice area has its drawbacks. So the strength of corporate law is it's very easy to build a book of business a lot of times. Drawback is when there's serious recessions, a lot of times, it becomes very, very difficult for a corporate attorney to kind of move. And a lot of times they just lose their jobs in droves, especially in large law firms, because, law firms, it's a big recession, like companies will immediately stop going public in the stock exchange, and a lot of times they'll stop merging and doing all money and doing all these things. And so suddenly all the work that the corporate attorneys were doing stops, and then the corporate attorneys will need to look for new jobs, and they won't be able to find jobs. So